He had an exceptional talent with the sword. There was nothing he couldn't learn and nothing that could escape his blade. He worked hard enough to have blood stains on the palms of his hands, but after giving up, he spent 20 years honing his skills with a knife. He became the best swordsman in the country. In the next scene, we see a cook cutting up a fish for a restaurant dish. The frenetic movement of the staff passing from one side to the other and the orders on the tables form a typical restaurant hubbub. Then something catches the eye of the cooks, who look at a man very focused on his work. One of the cooks tells the chef that his cell phone is ringing, but he hasn't heard it. He says he should have put it on vibrate, and when he sees a notification from a game he had already uninstalled, he wonders why it's still showing up, assuming the phone was broken. Suddenly, someone tells the boss that a guest has arrived. The boss, exasperated, asks him to say he's not there. However, the guest is already approaching, demanding an answer from the boss, because he believes he's had enough time to think. He doesn't think the request is difficult for someone who works with blades all day, so he apologizes, saying that he might be being insensitive. He opens a briefcase full of money and says he'll make sure he doesn't disappoint his boss by offering an advance payment of 300 million. The boss, however, simply takes the knife and cuts something, saying that that kitchen is a clean place and not for dirty people like him. He asks him to leave, but what he cut was a tuna that was hanging. The guest is furious, saying that the chef is practically the saint of the sword, and asks what a saint of the sword is doing in a kitchen. When he picks up the knife, everyone is shocked, and the guest leaves, saying he won't give up so easily. Later, he stops for a smoke, and another employee comments that the offer of 300 million is tempting. The boss replies that in his life he has only cut off fish heads and has never been a crook. The other employee suggests that he take the money and do something with the knife, but the boss replies that he would accept up to 1 billion. The employee then notices that the boss's cell phone is full of notifications, joking about girlfriends. The boss explains that it's just a boring game. The employee asks if it's that divine protection thing, and the boss confirms that he's out of that game. Someone calls the other employee to clean the kitchen, and the boss reflects on how, when he was young, his family went bankrupt and he started working hard to live as a human. He wonders why his cell phone keeps ringing, if he should reinstall the game. After drinking, he decides to delete it again, but when he clears the notification, he accidentally clicks on it and the game, Divine Protection, opens. He thinks that, although he doesn't play much, the soundtrack is nostalgic and the female characters are still beautiful. Suddenly, the cell phone crashes and everything glows. In the next scene, an employee comes out saying that they're calling the boss, but he's disappeared. They ask where he is and why he left his cell phone behind. Someone suggests that he must have gone to the toilet. Meanwhile, the cell phone screen displays, "Transfer complete 100%. Next, a little is explained about the game, Divine Protection, which is a typical pay-to-win model. The narrator admits that he plays because he likes the look of the characters, has never spent a penny on in-game purchases and hasn't finished the game, eventually falling for one of the background characters, called Kong Geomar. Suddenly, on the street, he bumps into a woman and, like a typical LOL player, thinks, "Oh my god, a woman." He asks if everything is okay and she confirms it. He thinks that the game is based in Korea, so the geography, locations, and language are very much inspired by Korea. That's why he adapted easily while he was still a teenager. He lives inside the game, not knowing if reality is a game or if he's pretending not to know, leading the normal life of a high school teenager, as he did in his previous life. When he gets home, his mother is overjoyed and shows him a letter saying that he has been accepted into a college. He asks her to stop it, but she insists that she is proud and has seen this paper many times before. His parents are much more excited than he is, even though they know the entrance ceremony is tomorrow. She asks if he's packed, and he says yes, just finalizing a few details. Discouraged, he thinks that his ordinary, quiet life has been completely ruined. In his room, reflecting on how he was accepted into such a prestigious school, he remembers that his parents told him that last year he had manifested his blessing. He wonders how this is possible. Before he possessed Geomar's body, he manifested his blessing by immediately passing the entrance exam for Hoakin Academy. The protagonist wonders if the boy is a genius. It is explained that the blessing allows humans to use special abilities. In short, it's the same concept as in the game, but not all humans have this divine protection. Wealthy and noble people are generally more likely to have it. So the Hoakin Academy was created under the pretext of training heroes, but it's really only open to the elite. Recently, An introduction program for people from non-heroic families was created, allowing Geomar to enter. He reflects that the need for heroes is to fight monsters, but he doesn't want that reality. He doesn't want to be in a school being trained to be a hero in a war. He gets bored just thinking that there is a blessing, until the window of statues appears. He says that the status window is still as ugly as ever, and the system shows that he has the blessing of no pain. This blessing is active for 30 seconds and has a recharge time of 12 hours. The protagonist wonders if he's really been accepted into college with it. 30 seconds and 12 hours of recharge time is sad. He realizes that this blessing was received upon arriving in the body, and it is not the blessing of the god of the sword. Any hit with a blade cuts off the activation time, which is infinite, and he decides that he will activate it with a sword of 30 centimeters or less and 5 centimeters thick. He wonders if this blessing isn't too powerful. Is someone playing a joke on him? The ability seems very simple. If you hit, you cut. But how does it work? There must be a condition to activate it. He looks at the specifications of the blade and concludes that it is the perfect size for a sashimi knife, the same one he used in his past life. The protagonist reflects that he has no idea what the game wants with him. Life never goes the way he wants it to. Finally, he finishes tidying up, but realizes he's forgotten his equipment. He stops and thinks about the items he had when he started playing. A-rank equipment costs millions. S-rank equipment must be extremely rare. He doesn't want anything too flashy so as not to waste money, but if he doesn't take anything, he'll be marked down. Decided, he says he'll get some equipment. Think that, in a previous life, a teacher insisted that Japanese knives are very worthwhile. So why not give it a go? After all, a truly good person never blames the equipment. The next day, he's all packed up, and a colleague asks him what he's carrying. We see that he's carrying a lot of sashimi knives. He's stopped at an equipment review on the first day, and the instructor, noticing the situation, thinks that every year there's someone who pulls a prank. He needs to show authority to this kind of person. He knocks on the table and asks him if he thinks this is a joke, coming into the gym with kitchen knives. The protagonist simply replies that it's his equipment. The instructor, after thinking for a while, gets angry, but Geomar says, "Mr. Instructor, I'm a special admission from an ordinary family. My family can't afford to provide me with equipment." The instructor notices that his tag is a different color, indicating that he is a special admission. He recognizes that real equipment is very expensive and that this type of student will have disadvantages in their education. The protagonist even sends a direct message, saying that blaming someone for the equipment is immature. These words stick in his mind. An expert never blames his equipment. He reached the pinnacle of the blade without the proper equipment. That's the philosophy he carries with him. The instructor senses this presence and tells him that the student Geomar, admitted by special admission, can use his own equipment. He thanks him and, as he leaves, the rich students start talking badly about him for having been admitted by special admission. The instructor tells them all to shut up, saying that he is now on the protagonist's side. He says that it depends on their actions, not where they came from. Everyone replies, "Yes, sir." The protagonist thinks that, after all this, he's going to get post-traumatic stress disorder. After this situation, he says he needs a break. He didn't expect it to be so awkward and uncomfortable going into the gym. But at least the equipment assessment is ready. Now he just has to take the test to see what class he'll be in. He reflects that he's come a long way anyway, considering it's an extremely privileged academy. Hoakin Academy is really different from seeing everything through the screen of a cell phone. The campus is so big that it feels like a small town. The protagonist admits that this is actually quite nice. He thinks back to his past life when he had to drop out of school for lack of money. Could he have imagined being there one day in his past life? Suddenly, a loudspeaker announces that the exam is about to begin and that the new students must gather by 3 p.m. The protagonist is surprised. That early? I've been through the entrance ceremony, but this exam is much more important. He says he needs to test a new piece of equipment. Then he remembers that he hasn't touched a knife since he arrived in this life. He recalls his master's words, "You must never let go of your sword. Sleep with it if necessary." He thinks that he's lived 22 years for the sword. A little rest wouldn't harm his skills. He takes a look at the knife, checking that it's sharp enough, and concludes that it's not bad at all. He decides to test it by cutting a leaf, but when he draws the knife, it starts to be energized. The system informs him that the conditions for the blessing of the god of the sword have been met, but it also realizes that the protagonist's body is still very weak, as is the level of his equipment. A suppression takes place to synchronize the body with the current equipment. Geomar thinks, wait, the skill is already activating. He activates the skill at level 1. and the system says, "May the gods bless you." Suddenly, he feels intense pain as the energy travels through the knife and his body. He thinks he might die from the pain, but he survives and finds himself in a completely different space. He wonders what the fuck just happened. When he drops the knife on the ground, it seems that reality begins to reconstruct itself. Wait a minute, am I back at the moment when I dropped the knife? What the hell is that? Until he feels a strong headache and thinks that the ability has activated, but wonders why the blessing made the whole world shatter and why this pain is a side effect. It seems that when he used the blessing of not feeling pain, he was left with only a muscle ache in his body afterwards. He concludes that if the activation is always like this, he will never be able to use the knife. Again, the loudspeaker announces that the new students need to assemble immediately. The protagonist wonders if he can take his knife back, because he can't just leave a sashimi knife on the floor. Maybe it only hurt because it was the first time. He believes that everything will be fine, but when he picks up the knife again, he feels intense pain. In the next scene, we are in the training area, where several students are already standing around, waiting. There are several nobles talking, and we see an important character, the Emperor of the Sword, a 7-star hero, Siegfried von Nibelung. He is said to be the direct descendant of Aaron Nibelung and is also an apprentice of the legendary hero, the most powerful human today. The nobles are intimidated by his presence and say they're going to sit down. Then a woman appears next to the Emperor of the Sword. She is also a 7-star heroine, Medea, and she asks the Emperor what his life has been like in the last half-century. He replies, "Just Medea," and asks, "Are you dressed like that in a gym, by any chance? Is turning 70 an excuse to go crazy?" She says that all women deserve to feel beautiful and that she can make him look 10 years younger with her blessing, if he wants. He comments that, even at 70, she still looks like a child, and that people should judge others by their character, not their age. She says that Sieg is as silly as ever, just as he has been for the last half-century. He calls her an old fox, but she replies that today's events and people are much cooler than in their day. She asks if Sieg's granddaughter must be pretty, but he doesn't answer. The guys say that the match is about to start while they organize themselves. Our protagonist is isolated and thinks that maybe he's the only one on his own, remembering that he got in by special admission and that people bully this type of student. Suddenly, a girl walks by, making space between the people, and the boys are amazed by her beauty. The protagonist recognizes her as Abel von Nibelung, the granddaughter of the Emperor of the Sword and the main heroine of the game Divine Protection, for which he has spent so much money. In the next scene, we learn about something called subspace, created by the legendary hero Baylor Joachim. It's an alternative space from reality, where pain and experience are real, but the person doesn't suffer, without intervention in reality, and murders can even take place. The Emperor of the Sword asks if the training will be in subspace, and Medea confirms. She explains that the school will be doing a different kind of battle royale this year, with groups of 10 people, and whoever survives wins, with no equipment restrictions. The Emperor asks if this means that the elite students can take whatever they want. Medea asks him not to mention it, pointing out that the academy is only focused on money. She's had a lot of headaches with this new system, and when he hears the word special admission, our protagonist is amazed, thinking that she really is incredible. Before, he saw her in 2D, now she's right there in front of him. He reflects that, if it wasn't better than that, he'd be with the guys trying to talk to her. Abel von Nibelung, the main character in Divine Protection, is very connected to him. He believes that beautiful people always find couples, but as a student who got in by special admission, he's not interested in that kind of school life. The 3 words he has set himself are safe, ordinary, and chosen. He wants to study quietly, get a job, and have a secure life. He thinks that being a hero is out of the question, as he can barely cope with the pain. Then the magic crystal starts announcing the rules. The test will be a battle royale between the 10 people who manage to complete it, and the highest rank is called Star, the second is Dragon, while ranks 3 to 7 are Wolf and 8 to 10 are Ordinary. Based on these results, they will be assigned to different classes. Points will be calculated automatically, and there is no time limit. The protagonist thinks that it will be very similar to the game, and that his goal is to complete everything quickly and without attracting attention. He then activates the spatial occurrence device and the exam begins. Suddenly, several shadows begin to take over the arena, and the robot continues to say, "May the hero's blessing be with you." The protagonist decides to avoid drawing his weapon as much as possible. In the next scene, we see everyone leaving subspace, wounded, and the magic crystal announcing the placements of all the groups. The Emperor and Medea are there watching, and she thinks that Sieg, his granddaughter, as well as the descendants of Shangsong and Zheng are there. The results were basically predetermined. She notes that, in 7 minutes, someone set a record with a C-rank weapon, which requires a lot of mastery of one's blessing. Medea comments that these new youngsters are acting as if they were older, even though they are not at the level of their time. Surely this selection will go down in the history of the Academy. The Emperor of the Sword says that this is normal for his granddaughter, a descendant of the Nibelung family. He mentions that it looks like it's coming to an end and that he's going to leave. Medea replies that there really aren't many people watching, but the Emperor asks if he really is going to leave. She says yes, and he replies that he'll see her next time. She makes fun of him, saying, "Until next time, old man," until suddenly, both the Emperor and Medea feel something very strong. In fact, they all feel it. Medea asks if he has felt it too, and he replies that it's simply ridiculous. He mentions that this sensation is difficult to perceive, and that he only felt it for the last time around the president. Suddenly, they hear a very loud noise, and the subspace rift begins to open up in the sky, as if someone had cut through subspace. Then 2 people fall through the crack, and the audience is left wondering what is going on. The crack begins to glow brightly, and something quickly descends from it, a sashimi knife. Medea starts calling the medical team to rescue whoever is there, and we see that it's the protagonist who is lying next to the knife. Now we see the scene from his perspective. He now realized that the outcome had already been decided. There were elite people there, but unfortunately, through sheer bad luck, he ended up in a match where his life was at stake. We see that there was a group massacring the other students, and he comments that he fell in with the evil twins, the 2 brothers from the Pharaoh family, Majum and Shumo. We noticed that they were beating up and finishing off the other students. They have a natural talent, but they are also brutal and very violent. The protagonist mentions that they've been beating up the others for 30 minutes, but he hasn't been affected yet. He wonders, am I so weak that they didn't even notice me? Then one of the brothers simply throws down a student who appears to be dead and starts counting 1, 2, asking his brother how many he has already knocked down. At this point, he sinks the student's head into the ground with a kick. The other brother complains that he has already picked up 4, while he has only dropped 2. But the brother says he left one for him, and then they point to a little girl who was there, completely frightened. The protagonist is alerted by this, noting that the girl is in total panic, unable to fight. The taller brother approaches slowly, saying that he likes people who cry and scream a lot. The other brother comments that, even though they are twins, he thinks the taller one looks like a pervert, and asks if he should start by breaking the girl in half. Until the protagonist appears, calling the brothers assholes and sons of bitches. He says that, even though it's a subspace, there's no reason for them to go that far. "Are you psychopaths?" he asks. Soon, the protagonist realizes, damn, I did that without realizing it. The 2 brothers then notice his presence, since they didn't know he was there, and call him a disgusting plebeian, coming from a special admission. This makes them very happy, and the taller brother says he'll rip his head off quickly, promising that he'll pay for the insults. Meanwhile, the protagonist, Goma, is thinking about what to do. Should I use my blessing? He decides it won't work, since his blessing only lasts 30 seconds, while the brothers have been beating up other people for 30 minutes, until he remembers his weapon, the sashimi knife, but hesitates, because he knows that when his blessing manifests, he feels a lot of pain. All he wanted was an ordinary, safe life, but half a day had passed and he had already failed at that. The brothers wonder what he's doing, and Goma slowly takes the sashimi knife out of his bag. They both start laughing, saying that he only has a little knife. The taller brother scoffs, saying he's going to kill him and start smashing his head in. The protagonist then reflects, this is a life or death situation, and I only have 30 seconds. He has to think fast and decides to use the blessing that removes pain. Soon after, he activates the blessing of the god of the sword, but the blessing that removes pain neutralizes the effect of the divine blessing. The brothers continue to mock him, asking what he intends to do with a kitchen knife. Goma thinks, if I don't cut it, I'll die. But will this huge, fat body really be cut by a sashimi knife? He's not a fish, he's a human. I've never cut a human before. He remembers his master saying, not even if God wielded that knife could he cut someone like that. But he also remembers another phrase, if you cut, you'll be cut to pieces. When the taller brother jumps up to attack him, Goma doesn't hesitate. He makes a cut with his knife and uses the divine cut, tearing off the hand of one of the brothers. At that moment, he thinks, finally, I can take revenge on those assholes. The brother's hand, along with his glove, falls heavily to the ground. In a flashback, we see Goma in his past life asking the master why gangsters ate sashimi. The master, annoyed, says, I told you to call me master, and why do you care? The master explains that he was a former gangster who lost one of his hands during a gang action. To make people happy with knives, not sad, he opened a sushi restaurant. Although the master was skilled with knives, he wonders why, in the movies, everyone seems fascinated by sashimi knives. Goma asks if these knives work in real life, and the master replies, if you stab someone with a large kitchen knife, the person's skin contracts, making it difficult to remove. Sashimi knives, because they are thin, allow several cuts. Back in the present, his brother's arm is cut off like butter. He screams in pain and, in desperation, begs Goma to move away, fleeing in panic. The other brother, shocked by the situation, watches as the taller brother cries out for help, but before he can, his head is cut in half. The surviving brother, seeing this, is shocked and has no reaction. When he looks down at the ground, he sees the other half of his brother's head. Finally, he reacts, screaming in despair. Goma, overcome with rage, watches as his surviving brother thinks, my brother isn't dead, this is just subspace. But who is this guy? He cut someone's head off with a sashimi knife. He realizes that he has to be very careful with that knife. The survivor thinks his brother lost the fight because he wasn't paying attention. So he grabs his brother's fallen arm and steals his glove, deciding to use both. He activates the resolution blessing, which increases his defense, his jumping ability by 200%, and the power of his punches. He says that he now has 3 benefits at the same time. Confident, he says that no matter where Goma's knife came from, not even an S-rank weapon could penetrate his defense now. Meanwhile, Goma continues to count down the 30 seconds. At the moment, he's on the 21st second. The fat man takes advantage of a gap and advances against the protagonist, saying that he is whispering, distracted in the middle of the fight, and that he is now going to smash his head in. Meanwhile, our protagonist keeps counting the seconds. 7, 6, 5. The fat man suddenly wonders what the hell has happened, as he finds himself on the ground with countless knives embedded in his body. 3, 2. And when the fat man dies, time runs out. The system tells him that the effect of the blessing of pain is over, and the protagonist starts screaming intensely, holding the knife. In the next scene, the protagonist slowly opens his eyes and asks himself, am I in hospital? As he tries to get up, he feels a sharp pain. Someone quickly enters the room, just to check if he's awake, and tells him that he's conscious. At that moment, the protagonist sees a face he never imagined he would see. The person who, 50 years ago, decimated the Demon King's army. In front of him are 2 legendary heroes from 7 stars, Siegfried, the strongest of mankind, and Medea, the principal of the academy. He is confused as to why these people are there. Sieg asks his name, and the protagonist introduces himself as Geomar. Sieg gets straight to the point. What the hell did you do in there? Geomar remembers the strange feeling he had in subspace. He knows that, at that moment, he wasn't in control of his own body. Seeing that Sieg has his sword ready, Geomar thinks that it's not good to be targeted by someone so dangerous. Geomar admits that although he thought the brothers were overreacting, he also ended up overreacting. That's why he's willing to accept any punishment. Sieg looks at him seriously, but Medea interrupts. Come on, old man, are you going to bully the boy? She sits down next to Geomar and explains that it was Sieg who unclogged his meridians while he was unconscious. It seems that the older you get, the more stubborn you get, doesn't it? Jokes Medea. She tells Geomar to look at her, because she likes shy people, which embarrasses both the protagonist and Siegfried. Geomar wonders why the sword master did this for him. At the same time, he notices that his body is much lighter than before. Medea then mentions that they have reviewed the video of the fight and that she was moved by the fact that he protected an underprivileged student, something she had always dreamed of seeing in a prince. Maybe you're my little hero, she jokes. The emperor, however, scolds her. Medea. She apologizes and explains that she was just reassuring Geomar not to worry, because he wouldn't be punished for what he had done. Medea reveals that the 2 brothers only passed the academy thanks to the influence of their family, but that they will now be expelled. Geomar, relieved, thinks, at least I won't have to share my school life with those kind of people. The emperor then reveals that they were there for another reason. Geomar became the best student in the test. Surprised, he thinks, what? I just wanted a peaceful and safe life. Later, at the academy, Medie comments that in 20 years as principal, this is the first time something like this has happened. When Geomar finds out that he has been classified as the best student, he immediately says that he doesn't want to be first. Both Medea and the Emperor are shocked by this response. Medea tries to convince him, Geomar, think again. Do you know what it means to be the star of the class? Even so, he insists that he doesn't want to. The Emperor remains silent until Medea teases him, asking if he is angry because Geomar has taken his granddaughter's place. The Emperor denies it, saying that it would be immature to judge someone solely on family influence. He praises Geomar for having shown exceptional skill, especially with that great court, and comments that, despite his lack of physical training, Geomar has perfectly embodied the pinnacle of fencing. However, the Emperor noticed something strange in Geomar's meridians, as if there was something inside him that shouldn't be there. Meanwhile, Medea, observing Geomar, comments, he's quite handsome, isn't he? The way he killed his opponents to save a helpless girl. If I were 10 years younger, I might even give him a chance. She turns the subject away, but the Emperor asks what young people nowadays call people like her. Medea, irritated by the question, slams her cup on the table. In the next scene, we see Geomar on his way to his new class, the Wolf class. He remembers Medea saying that he would stay in this class, but he thinks, I wanted to stay in the Tiger class. Is that all right? She promptly denies it, saying that if the best student went to Tiger class, the school would lose credibility. In return, she promises to keep his secret. Geomar reflects that his idea was to finish school safely in a lower class, without having to struggle so much. When he enters the classroom, all the students look at him, but then ignore him when they realize that he is from a special admission. He thinks, if you're going to ignore me, at least stop staring at me, right? Soon after, the girl he saved in the test approaches him to thank him. Do you remember me? She asks. Geomar politely answers yes. He introduces himself as Kong Geomar, and the girl tells him her name is Chloe. He thinks it's nice to have someone he knows in the same class and thinks, I don't remember this character in the game, but the main characters are a minority. Maybe she's an extra character, like me. Geomar asks Chloe to keep what he did on the test a secret, and she agrees. She was about to ask something when the teacher enters the room, asking everyone to sit down. The teacher hands out the books and congratulates the students, saying that everyone there has been chosen to inherit the legacy of the brave ancestral hero Valor Hoakin, and that they must honor that pride. His name is Line, and he is the instructor of the Wolf class. On the first day, he tells them that they will start with some basic exercises. Everyone must put on their equipment and be in the training area within 30 minutes. One of the students asks what they're going to do, and Line replies that it will be simple. No push-ups, sit-ups, or squats, just running 10 laps around the training area. If there are no more questions, they can begin. The protagonist, PR, thinks, could it be that at the end of this training we'll go bald? He approaches the teacher, who asks him what he wants. The PR, called by the name of Gelmar, thinks, wait a minute, does he know my name? Gelmar says he wants to get out of training, claiming he's not feeling very well, but the teacher replies that, as he's an excellent student, this routine won't even make him sweat. Line even comments, there's a star class exercise for you today. He goes on to say that the principal mentioned that Gelmar should always be given a higher level of difficulty than the rest of the class. Gelmar, surprised, thinks, that damn old woman. Gelmar tries to escape by saying that he needs to go to the bathroom because he's cramped, and the teacher, understanding, says, of course, as expected of a good student like you. I'll wait for you there. In the next scene, Gelmar is running, but behind everyone. He's exhausted, can hardly feel his legs, and thinks he's dying. As he continues his efforts, repeating 1, 2, 1, 2, Chloe appears next to him and asks if he's okay, as he looks exhausted. He replies that he's fine. Chloe then asks him how many laps he's done, and Gelmar, not knowing exactly, replies 5. She tells him that he's already done 7, leaving him shocked but encourages him, saying that he'll make it. She runs off ahead of him, and he thinks, this damn test has finished me. In the next scene, in Gelmar's room, the floor is covered in water bottles. He finishes drinking one more and complains, this is shit, I'm finished. In just 1 week at the gym, he has already faced many problems. Remembering his first time in the cafeteria when he was starving, he realized that he needed a ticket to eat. When he saw the prices on the menu, he was shocked. Rice with spicy pork cost 50,000. My God, why is it so expensive? He thought. Since then, he has drunk nothing but water, throwing a bottle against the wall out of hunger. He regrets not taking the money his parents offered him and regrets surviving on only the cheapest water on campus. Thinking of his blessing, the system appears and informs informs him that his physical level has risen to 12. As his physique improves, the sword restrictions are relaxed, allowing him to use a sword 2 centimeters longer. Although it doesn't seem like much, Jelmar realizes that he's much fitter and that all his training hasn't been in vain. He reflects that evolution is essential for him and that, with the blessing of him evolving, he will be able to use a real sword in the future. Looking at his knives, he remembers how nervous he was using them at the entrance ceremony. Now, even in pain, he can hold a sword, and he wonders, is this the result of my blessing? Suddenly, he hears a knock on the door. Chloe appears, shyly, asking if she's interrupting his rest. Jelmar, surprised by her presence, says no, he was just lying down. Chloe comments that she hasn't seen him for a week in the cafeteria and asks if he's all right. He replies that he hasn't been eating meals prepared by others, but he's actually starving. Chloe shyly invites Jelmar to have a supply with her, and he, excited at the idea of finally eating something, accepts. In the next scene, late at night, Chloe finishes eating what Jelmar has prepared, praising the food. He is honored and comments that preparing fish is his specialty. Chloe reveals that she grew up on the coast, which explains her love of fish. Jelmar, excited to have done something good without feeling pain in his hands, decides to cut sashimi. However, he remembers the blessing and asks if Chloe has a bigger knife. She then shows him a huge katana, but Jelmar prefers to use his kitchen knife. Activating the blessing, he finishes preparing the fish in 21 seconds, impressing himself with his own skill. Chloe, curious, asks how he got so good at cooking. Jelmar explains that he worked part-time in a restaurant, but realizes that the concept of part-time work doesn't seem to be common in that world. Chloe offers to do the dishes in exchange for a meal, and Jelmar accepts. While she's doing the dishes, Jelmar starts humming, satisfied with his full belly. Suddenly, he hears the sound of a plate breaking and sees Chloe apologizing, all flustered. He thinks, she's probably never washed a dish in her life, right? When he goes to put some things away, a book falls over and we realize that it appears to be a diary. Contains some notes, a drawing, and a prototype. The question arises, is that her diary? He comments that her handwriting is very cute, with stickers all over it, and says he should put the diary back. But then he stops to look at a page and comments that she's very kind and cute, actually. He decides to take another look, why not? Until he comes to a page where it says, I love you, repeated 80 times. When he sees this, he thinks, oh my god, now we've had it. Just then we hear the sound of another plate breaking, as Chloe turns around and asks, are you reading my diary? In the next scene, it is explained that heroes are respected for killing demons, and this increases even more when they gain a global reputation. However, in the name of this, some factions abuse the weakest just because they have authority. To punish these types of people, one family was tasked with leading this area, but they preferred to operate in the shadows. The name of this family is the Auditorium of Cilicia, which specializes in assassins who work in the shadows. Those born into the Auditorium of Cilicia family have their psychology oppressed from a young age. Emotions are completely repressed, and everyone undergoes extremely harsh training. In one scene, we see Chloe observing this brutal training. In the next scene, she holds a katana. Everyone there is molded to become a killing machine, many at a young age. The girls engrave the family symbol on their palms with blood. We see her grandfather speaking to Chloe, Cilicia Auditorium, don't underestimate your skills as an assassin. She heard these words many times until she consciously accepted that this was her identity. The training distorted her nature, casting a great shadow over her heart, eroding her identity until only traces of emotion remained. It was at this time that Chloe entered the Joachim Academy, where students were organized according to their abilities. Although her talent was incredible, by decree of her own family, Chloe was placed in the ordinary class, since the Auditorium family thrives in the shadows. That was the agreement between the family and the academy. She had to remain undetected. During the first 3 years of her life, the family had already completely eliminated the freedom of those born there. Chloe accepted her fate as an assassin without protest. Nothing would change that, or so she thought until she met a boy. She remembers a scene in which Geomar curses the others, calling them psychopaths, before going to save her in subspace. It wasn't a real death experience, but Chloe felt as if it was. Even though her destiny as an assassin had already been mapped out, she had given up on meaningless fights. Trained to kill only those who deserved it, she believed that nothing would change her fate. But Of course, something might surprise her, a ray of sunlight that would break through the clouds of her life. She remembered a book she had hidden under her pillow when she was younger. It was a tale about a princess and the prince who saved her. Now, before her eyes, the prince from that story was taking shape. Her chest tightened, her heart began to beat harder, and repressed feelings began to surface. She realized that this was love. In the next scene, we return to the present. The protagonist is staring at Chloe, who has a dark look on her face, while he stares blankly in silence. He thinks, I'm screwed. How am I going to get out of this now? During his teenage years, nobody liked him, so he should have realized what was happening beforehand. Obviously, she was feeding him. He tries to deflect. Chloe, it's a beautiful night, isn't it? Have you seen the moon? You've made me a very happy person by giving me food, but I think it's time for me to go. I'll see you tomorrow. Chloe asks, have you seen it? And he looks at the diary, trying to lie. That book? Oh, that must be the one you used to study, right? She replies, the diary, and he thinks, how did she see it? Does she have eyes in the back? At that moment, her formality disappears, and the protagonist realizes that Chloe has completely changed. He tries to justify it. I didn't see. No, I didn't see anything. Okay, I saw. Chloe then draws her katana, and he thinks, just like that. Desperate, he considers his options. Jumping out of the window, being on the 4th floor, would result in certain death. His only way out would be through the door, but he's trapped. Chloe starts dragging the katana towards him, and he thinks, she's really going to kill me. Maybe she's not well. He notices that her pupil is still, her eyes opaque. She's definitely a yandere, those anime characters with dual personalities. He thinks that managing a person is difficult enough, but when the person has a dual personality disorder, then things get really complicated. Geomar realizes that it was the diary that caused it. He fears that Chloe is going to chase him to his death, and in order to guarantee his safety in the future, he knows he has to take the initiative today. Geomar notices that Chloe's aura is much more intense than those of the thugs he's already faced, and he thinks that the academy is becoming more and more difficult. He needs to get out of this situation. He has only used 21 seconds of the Blessing of Pain, which means there are still 9 seconds left, but the sashimi knife that could help him is too close to Chloe, making it impossible to catch. Chloe, for her part, is already preparing to attack, and the protagonist grabs the first thing he sees, a stiletto. When she advances with the katana, he holds the stiletto and thinks he needs to end it immediately, but realizes that the blade is too small. The system warns that this kind of exercise increases mental resilience, and his words and actions now have a temporary intimidation. The blessing of the sword god has been activated, and the system wishes him luck. May the gods be with you, Geomar. Chloe and Geomar confront each other, she with a katana, he with a stiletto. He comments, Chloe, your hair is really long, isn't it? Maybe it's time to cut it a bit. In the next scene, we see quick cuts in the air. In the next scene, Chloe is in bed. She gets up slowly, asking, where's Geomar? Where did he go? She tries to remember the last thing that happened. She was looking at him and he was watching the moon. Worried, she looks for her katana and breathes a sigh of relief when she finds it. Chloe comments that she almost always loses consciousness when she picks up her katana and remembers her grandfather's words, don't worry when that happens. You mustn't deny your talent as an assassin. She forgets about the murders she commits and, putting her face to the pillow, mutters, Chloe, you idiot, why did you pass out just then? She is embarrassed, thinking of Geomar, and wonders if she said something wrong before losing consciousness. Then she notices that her stiletto is on the floor. Why is it here? She asks herself. Suddenly, she realizes that her hair is short. Geomar had used the stiletto to cut it and had even thrown the cut hair in the garbage can. Chloe, with a shy smile, thinks, Geomar really is very kind, and decides to write it down in her diary before she forgets. She writes again how much she loves Geomar. Meanwhile, Geomar is outside, vomiting. He thinks that he has somehow managed to get out of that situation. He's only used 5 seconds of his blessing and, after throwing up some more, he comments to himself that he's just lost all his dinner. Then he goes to rest on a bench, still hungry. Geomar ponders who exactly Chloe is, because her fencing was perfect. She tried to strike directly at his heart with precision, a deadly technique that only formidable assassins master. If he had been taken by surprise, he would be dead now. When his life was at risk, he instinctively aimed for Chloe's neck. Fortunately, the stiletto was too short, so he only cut her hair. Geomar thinks, I've cleaned up the mess, so there shouldn't be any problems later, right? He realizes that keeping the peace in that place isn't easy, and that being ordinary is much more complicated than it seems. For the first time since he entered this game, he thinks he had no ambition, and only with a sashimi knife did he reach the pinnacle of swordsmanship. This is hard to imagine, even in the most fertile mind, but, as they say, everyone has a special skill. Geomar knows that he has a miraculous blessing, the divine protection, which is essential in the game. In addition, the protagonist has a powerful blessing, the blessing of Valor Joaquin, and a legendary sword called Wound, known for choosing its master. Meanwhile, Geomar only has a sashimi knife. He thinks he needs to control himself, remembering that nothing there is real. They're just characters. Even so, he forgets his initial goal and wonders. Is there anyone that ordinary in this world? Geomar has already given up trying to distinguish between who is the protagonist and who isn't, but at least he now knows his way around. It's been a week since he started studying at the academy and, according to the game story, the protagonist should be receiving his blessing now. Apparently, the story is starting to progress. Geomar knows the general plot, but he doesn't know what happens at the end. He reflects that although it's a bonus to know these things, it doesn't change the fact that he must follow the main story. He might miss out on all the advantages and shortcuts he can get. Geomar also recalls that the game becomes darker in the second half of the third year, when the demon tribes start chasing the protagonist, forcing the academy to act against the demons. This leads to a war between humans and demons, and, in the end, the game falls into a cliché. Geomar remembers how, in his past life, he thought, what a sudden turn of events. He was leading a quiet school life in the game, exactly as he wanted, but suddenly everything began to deteriorate. That's when he deleted the game. Now, at the thought that a war is about to happen in this world, he wonders, am I going to die in this war? He doesn't want that to happen, and realizes that he has 3 years to prepare. At this point, Geomar understands that he needs a more realistic goal. He must become stronger in order to survive. Although he believes that most stories have happy endings, he knows that he needs power to protect himself and avoid death in war. However, he decides to train discreetly. If he appears too much, he could end up fighting on the front line, which he wants to avoid at all costs. In addition, Geomar understands that he must restrict the use of his blessing of the sword god. Although this blessing makes him incredibly powerful, the stress it puts on his body is not worth it. Analyzing the system screen, he notices something strange. There is a lot of new content, different from the original game. Body, mind, and equipment always appeared, but what is assimilation? And why are there 3 question marks? When you try to access these options, the system warns you that the conditions have not yet been met. He thinks, that's not important now. Geomar also ponders another mystery, the gift he received. However, beyond these doubts, he knows that he needs physical training and a new weapon. He can only use the Blessing of Pain for 30 seconds, and he needs to train with a sword that doesn't activate the sword god ability. Fortunately, next month there will be a monster extermination practice, and the reward will be a B-rank Murasame sword. If he manages to master it, it will be enough for his graduation. Geomar hopes that the Murasame is not compatible with his blessing. As he reflects on all this, someone catches his eye. It's Abel, the granddaughter of the Emperor of the Sword. Sweaty from her walk, she approaches him and says that this is her place. Geomar stares at her for a moment, but then moves a little to the side. She asks him to move a little more, and he does, thinking, Abel shouldn't even be looking at me like that. She then comments that he doesn't need to leave, just give her some space. Geomar thinks, what do you mean it's her place? It's just a public bank. But he understands that he needs to avoid any connection with the heroine of the game. Abel, for her part, seems to be trying to freshen up after her workout, and Geomar, a little embarrassed, notices her beauty. He remembers that the appearance of the heroines in the game is designed to captivate. Suddenly, Abel comments that this is the best place to observe the stars. Geomar thinks, damn, she started a conversation. He begins to wonder if this is really the same Abel he knows, the granddaughter of the Emperor of the Sword. And why is she talking to a guy as insignificant as him? Out of the blue, she asks him if his main weapon is a sword. Surprised, he asks how she knows, and Abel replies that her grandfather taught her to spot a swordsman by his eyes. She then offers him her sword to test, but Geomar refuses, thinking it's too strange. He wonders if Abel is all right. She then asks, do you know who I am? Geomar thinks she's suspicious, perhaps thinking he's a suspect, but replies that he knows her more or less. Abel replies that he doesn't know him, which leaves Geomar confused. What's the point of this conversation? He asks himself. She comments that it's a cliché. He knows her, but she doesn't know him. Geomar asks, "Should I tell my name to everyone I've just met?" Abel jokes, "You never know. It could be that you're a spy for the Demon King undercover as a student. After all, what would explain you being here alone at night?" Geomar ponders for a moment, then asks, "And why are you here?" Abel replies that he was obviously training. Geomar then comments that he was also training, practicing breathing. At that moment, he notices some wounds on her hands. Abel, embarrassed, tries to hide her hands, but he compliments her on her dedication. Abel replies that, of course, she needs to be diligent. He explains that the burden of being part of the Nibelung family is great. They need to be perfect at all times without showing weakness. She then reveals that, for the first time, she wasn't the best student of the year, something Geomar already knew. However, Abel doesn't seem sad when he says this, smiling slightly. She even feels relieved that she didn't come first. However, she is also curious to know who beat her, because she wants to crush that person next time. Then the protagonist, hearing this, almost vomits again and asks, "Do you have to go that far?" She replies that it's a question of pride. She says she asked her grandfather, but he refused to talk. She can't live as a runner-up without at least knowing who's first. Until she realizes that she's saying this to someone she doesn't even know. Then Geomar asks, "Why are you telling me this?" And she replies, "Because you seem weak. Show no mercy to the strong and be good to the weak. That's my family motto." She comments that everyone in her class is very good, which is why she has no friends. The protagonist thinks, so that's why the protagonist of the game hates her. She stretches and says she's going back to her room. As she turns to leave, she stops and asks, "Hey, are you going to tell me your name or not?" Geomar replies that he doesn't feel like it. In the next scene, the next day in class, the protagonist thinks that his school life has calmed down a bit in recent days. Chloe has quickly made new friends in class, so he pretends to be busy and avoids looking directly at her. Chloe's new friends started teasing him when they found out he was a special admit, but he doesn't mind at all. Besides, he wasn't the only special student in the class, and these people also avoid interacting much. Now, come to think of it, being in a lower class was much better for him. At this point in the game's history, the Star and Dragon classes are forming alliances, or rather factions. Even though he's not in any of these classes, Geomar already feels tired just thinking about it. At least now he's eating well, thanks to the principal, who gave him an unlimited card because he was the best student. It's a faculty membership card, but he hasn't had a chance to express his gratitude to the principal yet, as he hasn't seen her since. From that moment on, he started to like her a lot. He thinks he deserves it. After all, he's fulfilling all the duties of an exemplary student, and yet he's not making much of an impact on the academy scene. Now all he has to do is spend the next 3 years the same way, and he'll get the future he wants. In the next scene, during the lesson, the teacher explains that 700 years ago, during the first war between humans and demons, the hero Joachim Bearer, feeling the need to create heroes for future generations, founded an academy with his 7 disciples. The teacher tells them that this subject will be included in the exam, so they'd better familiarize themselves with it. The protagonist thinks he knows the story. The hero Joaquin fought for 20 years against the demons, more specifically against the commander of the first demon army, the right hand of the demon king Lon. Joachim emerged victorious from this battle, but lost an arm and was therefore no longer able to take part in the wars against the demons. The story mentions a scene in which 2 rays of light intersect, and it is said that Joaquin, after this battle, founded the Joaquin Academy to prepare future generations. The first war between humans and demons ended with a non-aggression treaty, which resulted in 700 years of peace. The people in the room begin to wonder if there will be a war in the 20th century, but no one seems worried. The protagonist reflects on these 700 years of peace, but only Geomar knows that the first crack in this peace is not far away. Everyone is used to this serenity. In the next scene, Geomar is talking to Medea. He would like to tell her what is going to happen, but he doesn't know the consequences. Although Medea wants to leave the board as soon as possible, Geomar explains that she was the first to smell the abnormality, thanks to his blessing. However, Medea was also the first of the 7 heroes to sacrifice herself to protect the students, according to the spoiler Geomar saw from the game. She was the first hero to be sacrificed by the Demon King. He is now pondering whether or not to tell her this. Back in the present, the teacher ends the lesson and asks the students to study hard for the exam. Suddenly, there is a commotion at the front of the room. Geomar wonders what's going on, until he realizes what day it is. May 5th, the day that person arrived in class. The protagonist thinks, if my memory serves me right, May 5th is the day he arrives. The main character of this world, Leon van Reinhardt. Soon, the 700 years of peace will be broken, and the protagonist thinks, that bastard's face is a disgrace. really? All the girls fall in love with him, and if this were a game for adults, someone would have killed Leon by now. The protagonist tries to keep positive thoughts, but it's annoying to remember that the other main female characters, such as Rachel de Miura, the Saint of the Spear, Sacrioso, daughter of the Bowmaster, and a Belle von Nibelung, granddaughter of the Emperor of the Sword, are all part of Leon's group. Even if it's annoying, Leon is the protagonist of this game, so everything will revolve around him from now on. He thinks that being around this guy in the same academy is like an involuntary enlistment, and this would be the second time he's enlisted. Geomar reflects that even Joachim only managed to seal the first commander of Hell. How strong must the Demon King be? He wonders. The protagonist isn't going to lose, is he? That would be a disaster. Then, suddenly, Leon looks at him and gives him a little smile. He doesn't react, but tries to calm down. It's okay. This is just a game. The protagonist will take care of everything. It's not my problem. However, he admits that Leon's face is very convincing, almost inspiring. He's almost convinced to fight the demons right now. Suddenly, someone calls out to him, but in the next scene, at night on the training ground, we see the protagonist practicing with a longer sword. He thinks it worked. A very long sword doesn't activate his blessing, because it's still weak. He reflects that, at the very least, he needs to know the basics of a sword. In a flashback, we discover that the person who called him was Chloe. She asked him if he'd done anything wrong, and he'd love to tell her that she nearly took his head off, but he'd rather not bring up that misfortune now. He just says no, that it's okay, he just feels a bit guilty. Chloe sighs with relief, but inside Geomar is thinking, who is this girl? Even unconscious, her blow almost went through my body. She seems to have a killer instinct. Her aura is enormous. She's definitely more dangerous than those thugs from earlier. Then Chloe asks if he has any plans for the evening, and if he'd like to have dinner together again. She says she really wants to take care of him, cook for him. She's not that good, but she wants to try, thinks the protagonist. He remembers that last time she almost killed him, but Chloe's gaze was so cute, practically begging him to accept. He thinks he'll feel bad if he refuses. But at the same time, he thinks, if I accept, I could wake up tomorrow inside a freezer. Then he says, Chloe, instead of dinner, could you do me a favor? She's intrigued and asks, a favor? What would that be? He replies, can you teach me fencing? He realizes that he has needed an instructor for a long time, and this is a good excuse. Besides, Chloe is very powerful. The night before, he watched a video called How to Survive a Yandra, and now he thinks, let's see if it works. Chloe shows up all dressed up and asks if he's arrived yet. He didn't even realize she was there. She says she arrived at 6:30, but he replies, well, weren't we supposed to meet at 8? He starts to stare at her, and she shyly asks if she looks strange in those clothes. He replies, no, of course not. However, the protagonist is thinking about something he hadn't noticed before. Because of her uniform, Chloe has a lot of muscles underneath those clothes. She's really cute today, he thinks. The protagonist hands her a wooden sword, and Chloe asks, well, aren't we going to use real swords? Geomar is surprised. What do you mean she thinks we're going to use real swords to train? He replies, we're just going to train, calm down, you don't have to use a real sword. Chloe frowns and, in a very strange way, says, you're very nice. The protagonist, already preparing himself with lessons on how to deal with a Yandra, watches Chloe test the sword, and a huge blast of energy appears. He wonders, how strong is she? Even the air is shaking around her. He reflects that he's very weak, but at least his blessing hasn't activated. He opens the system just to check again, but the length of the sword is still too long for him. His skill doesn't support this kind of blade. The protagonist wonders if blessings are really like that. Everyone gains experience and increases the level of their blessing, but his has additional effects. Is that normal? He concludes that he'll have to find out later what it is. Chloe notices that he's lost in thought and gets worried, but he apologizes and thinks, it seems that only I can see the system window. I must look crazy when I open it and stare at nothing. Then he sincerely asks Chloe to take it easy on him, because it's the first time he's practiced. She smiles and replies, all right, I'll take it easy. Geomar asks if they can finally start the training and reflects that, in his past life, everything he learned was through practical experience. Seeing is believing is the only way to really master something. You can't just dedicate yourself a little, you have to be willing to sacrifice everything for it, he thinks. That's why he's adapted so well to the academy, because of the hard training. As Chloe prepares, he remembers that this determination is something he has carried with him since his youth. He feels his palms sweating, and his posture looks a little awkward, but he knows that the final blow must hit his opponent. Chloe lunges at him unceremoniously, and he thinks, She's come too suddenly. She almost hits him in the neck, but he manages to dodge with great difficulty. She said she was going to take it easy, he thinks, frustrated. When Chloe changes her grip on the sword, the protagonist only manages to lift the sword, but with great difficulty. He thinks he's finally got the hang of it, but Chloe has already jumped up and is on top of him. He realizes that she's still very fast and wonders why she backed off that time. Their swords clash, but hers is so powerful that it cracks the protagonist's training sword. She continues to attack quickly, and he thinks that her blows are too heavy. He's almost at the limit of being able to block everything. He needs an opportunity, an opening for a counterattack, but his sword simply breaks in half. At that moment, Chloe returns a little to normal and apologizes. She tried to be as kind as possible, but ended up breaking his sword. The protagonist stands still, and Chloe wonders what is happening to him until she realizes something and is shocked. His sword has broken. That is, it has become smaller, and the blessing of the god of the sword has activated. The system warns him that his sword has been damaged and that Giamar's humanity level is dropping. He activates the blessing of the god of the sword, and the system informs him that what is happening is due to an error. The force suppressor has adjusted the personality of the target, in this case Giamar. Suddenly, we see a kind of simulator of his past life, and he wonders, "Hey, am I back in the kitchen?" He sees a fish on the board waiting for him. Then he chooses a knife to cut it with. A cleaver? No, that's not appropriate. A mistake. A katana? Much less. I'm not going to cut a fish with a katana. Ah, he's found the perfect weapon. A sashimi knife. He thinks this is very strange, but that's fine. He's going to cut the fish, just let everything happen as it should. We see that he is being controlled like a puppet, doing everything as it should be, and the system warns us that the protagonist's personality has been changed to evil. Chloe asks if he's all right, but he moves like a zombie. Suddenly, he rushes at her. She manages to block, but the attack is so strong that she stumbles, and the protagonist throws her away. She crashes into a wall, spitting and bloody. He's completely different from before, she thinks. When he tries to drive his sword into her, Chloe manages to dodge. We see that Giamar is completely out of control, and she thinks that, after an attack, he has become uncontrollable. She can barely move and wonders what has happened to him. She doesn't know why he's become like this, but she needs to finish her training. She asks him to stop, but doesn't realize that he's no longer listening. He advances, and she thinks she won't be able to dodge this attack. She cries out for him to regain consciousness as he prepares to finish the blow. She shouts his name, and he goes back to that simulation, wondering what's going on. Hey, is the fish I'm trying to cut alive? This fish represents Chloe, who is shouting his name. He wonders why the fish is shouting Giamar, until he looks at his reflection in the knife and thinks, that's right, I'm Kong Giamar now. He wonders where he is until he sees Chloe asking him to stop. The protagonist simply throws the sword before hitting her, until she realizes that he has finally regained consciousness and tells him he'd better stop for today, asking if he's all right. He just thanks her for the training and leaves. In the next scene, a little later, we see Chloe walking and wondering what happened. The feeling he had when he killed those two brothers at the entrance ceremony comes back. That was Giamar's true ability, and he is strangely powerful. She knows that what he used wasn't a technique, but pure instinct. Even if he unconsciously activated her blessing, she could barely fight him off. He simply decimated her with half a wooden sword. She thinks she knew she was strong, but not that strong. Then someone calls her, saying that she seems happy today. It's Nox, from the editor family, the same as hers. He's a second-year tiger, and she recognizes his older brother. He asks her if she joined the academy to get involved with plebs. She asks him not to talk about Giamar like that. He replies, "Oh, so his name is Giamar. I'll keep an eye on this Giamar guy." She simply turns around and says that if everyone from the editor family comes, no one will be able to kill Giamar. In the next scene, in Giamar's head, he thinks he needs to clarify a few things. The power he's been given is far from a blessing. It's like a curse, and he simply can't trust the sword god's blessing. He sought out new weapons, but even so this power rushed after him and took control of his body, as if the god of the sword thought his efforts were a joke. He didn't feel pain during that moment. He felt pleasure, a corrupt, intoxicated pleasure. That blessing was playing with him like a puppet, whispering sweet words in his ear. cut, kill, destroy. Then he gave up his body, but Chloe's indiscernible cries called his name again and again, until he recognized himself as Geomar. With that cry of hers, the fragmented world became whole again. Then he threw that wooden sword, which seemed to be stuck in his flesh and bones, because he instinctively thought that this would be the best decision in relation to Ander, who had tried to kill him not long ago. Chloe was the girl who had brought him out of his weak conscience. He was a little upset that the sword had broken, but at the same time he felt grateful. So he left the room quickly, before the blessing activated again. But will he really be able to control this blessing next time? This gift, which is more like a curse, has taken his life as payment, a gift in quotation marks that he will have to carry for the rest of his life. He doesn't want that, he just wants a normal life. He thought he could just take care of the little things as they came along, but he's just realized that there's something inside him, something that consumes sense and reason. It's not a blessing, it's a curse that wants to consume him entirely, an ability that should never have been given. The next scene takes place 3 days later. We see Lobo's class, where Chloe is talking to someone, but she's a bit despondent. She wonders where Geomar is and reflects that she can't even get in touch with him because she didn't get his number or anything. Why didn't she ask before? She even went to his dormitory and knocked on the door, but he only answered with groans of pain. She was afraid that he would hate her if she kept knocking, so she decided to leave. She likes to watch him from afar when he's lost in thought, his chin resting on his hand. She doesn't even know how many times she secretly looks at him in a single day, and is very careful when talking to him so that he doesn't think she's boring. At first, she was attracted to him because he risked his life for her, but maybe that was just an excuse to like him. Not least because she misses him so much. The next morning, which is very cloudy, we see the angry teacher telling everyone to shut up and asking if they're all at that prestigious school just to put on a little show. As it's a rainy day, they're not going to train and are going to stay there. But the teacher is also worried about Geomar, who hasn't shown up. He thinks that his favorite student probably has a reason for this and decides to wait patiently like a good educator, until someone opens the door, and the teacher is amazed that someone is just coming in and gets annoyed, but soon realizes that it's Geomar, who has a blank look on his face. He just doesn't seem to have any life in his eyes. Chloe gets up and asks for him, but he just apologizes to the teacher for being late. The teacher says it's all right, only that he should sit down in his seat. The staff begin to wonder if he's always had this creepy aura. For a special admission student, he seems very frightening, and the room gets into a very strange mood. In the next scene, during the break, everyone is going out to eat. Chloe goes to talk to Geomar and asks if everything is all right, what happened. He replies that it's no big deal, but she insists that he's been absent several times and worried if something had happened to him. She asks if it was because of the duel they had, but he says he was just a bit ill, that's all, and thanks her for her concern. Chloe is embarrassed and relieved, but the protagonist thinks she didn't believe it, and that's fair enough. He explains that over the last 3 days, he's been going through something akin to extreme withdrawal symptoms until he was mentally exhausted. He couldn't even leave his room to eat anything. He just stayed in bed praying that the convulsions would stop. He suffered from even worse pain than before, much worse than the price of using a broken gun. But that wasn't the only thing that happened. When she looked in the mirror, her appearance looked the same, but her face was deeper and a few strands of her hair had turned white. This was the punishment of a god, and the protagonist thinks that Chloe seems to feel guilty about it. Well, considering everything that's happened, it makes sense, but it's better to leave it behind. Then he says, "How about that dinner you invited me to last time? Is it still on?" She's embarrassed, and he says yes, he wants to try her food. She gets all excited, starts jumping up and down, and says that of course she's going to give it her best shot. The protagonist thinks that she seems to like it a lot and asks what he would like to eat. He says he'd like to eat fish again, but remembers that last time he threw it all up. Besides, fish is very expensive in that place. Suddenly, he senses something approaching. Both he and Chloe look and see her brother, Nox, who is exuding a murderous aura. The protagonist realizes that Chloe is very shocked by this and asks her if she knows who he is. They then face each other. Nox approaches him and says that if he wants to say anything, just say it, there's no need to stare. But Nox has a murderous look on his face, and the protagonist thinks, what's with those eyes of his? Chloe steps in front and asks Geomar not to talk to that guy, wondering why her brother showed up. The protagonist thinks that Chloe's attitude has completely changed in the presence of her brother. Her voice is shaking a bit. It sounds like she's afraid of something. Nox asks Chloe if she really broke the family rule because of that boy, since he doesn't seem like much. She replies that, family or not, she has nothing more to do with them. Nox insists that there's no way she can wash the blood off her hands. An editor, always an editor. The protagonist wonders what kind of drama and tragic story is playing out in front of him. It's as if she's a rebel from a story in a Victorian-era book. Nox simply tells Chloe to stop being silly and go back to her family, but she shouts too loudly, asking him not to talk about Geomar like that. He thinks she's gone a bit overboard. My God, she could tone down that shouting a bit. Suddenly, he remembers the name Editor, which specializes in infiltration and assassination. They are a group from the shadows who appear in the middle of the game, talking from family to family. There are only a few of them, but they only specialize in murder. All editors are ridiculously strong, having been trained since childhood to become killing machines. So, if Chloe is an editor, my God in heaven, what kind of situation has he gotten himself into here? Nox's expression makes more sense as that of a murderer. It's not the expression of someone who would hesitate to kill. He knows that the editors only kill to maintain order. They don't kill for no reason. It has to be justified. Until suddenly, he notices that Chloe looks very strange. She's biting her lip, and he thinks that maybe she wants to live a normal life too. But just like his blessing, she has a curse that prevents her from living as she wishes. She was destined for this emotionless life of an assassin, and he thinks it's very unlucky for her. He's not a hero. He can't save her, but he wonders what he's doing there. He needs to take the first step. He's a good person. After all, a person who doesn't save a life doesn't save the world. He walks over and says he's going to talk to Nox, asking Chloe not to worry. Can he save the life of just one girl? He thinks that his blessing is surely a curse, but he won't stop taking advantage of it. He tried to escape the blessing, but he couldn't. In the cartoons, they always say that there's no heaven for those who run from their problems, and that's true. He can't run from his problems. He has to face them. He decides to take the first step now. His name is Geomar, which means demon sword. He simply tells Nox to follow him, claiming that now he's going to cut him up. But he thinks that someone with that name probably uses a knife. Meanwhile, in the teacher's room, the teacher is thinking about what happened to Geomar. His expression has changed completely until another teacher comes in and asks what happened. He's so absorbed in his thoughts that it looks like he's going to go bald for good. He asks her not to talk about his baldness, okay? Then he gets an important call. They're informing him of something. The teacher, deep down, thinks that he started out bald and then made this cut, which is kind of cute. But the problem is that something is happening in a subspace. He wonders who requested a subspace out of the blue, and is told that it was Geomar who requested it, and his opponent is Nox Editor. The professor is shocked by this. And that's all for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel.